on episode number 440 of the School of Podcasting's morning announcements, we're going to end off today with a little history lesson and some Christmas music, but we've also got the typical things like a last 5 and 5. We got a pretty cool because of my podcast story. We have a podcast veteran with us, so we're going to talk about things like how do you know when to stop your show? What kind of gear did they use? Some really interesting stats on using your web host as a media host and not getting shut down. That's really interesting. And we're really going to be talking about, well, let me tell you this. A great comedian, Jim Gaffigan, once said that having 2 children is like drowning. Having 3 children is like drowning, and having someone hand you a baby. And today we're talking with John Wilkerson to find out how the heck do you podcast when you have 7 children in the house. Some pretty amazing tips. Even if you don't have kids, some great production tips, some great ideas on how to stay focused. Check it out. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I am your very own, your personal podcast coach, Dave Jackson, thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, this is where we talk about all things podcasting. I help you massage your message. I help you tackle the technology. I help you flatten the learning curve. And we get you on the road to pain-free podcasting. I've been helping people understand technology for so long that back in the day, I used to help people take a class called How to Surf the Internet. That seems so bizarre at this point. But our website is schoolofpodcasting.com. Very happy to have you along. If you'd like to join in on the conversation, go over to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact, and all my contact information is there. But we always like to start off the show with either some news or things like that. I like to spotlight other podcasts. And so it's that time.
And now it's time for a last 5 and 5. What were the last 5 podcasts you listened to?
Hey Dave, this is Mark from the OBeep Geocaching Podcast. You can find us over at www.obeep.com. And this is my quick last 5 in 5. First up is geogearheads.com. This is a geocaching podcast that covers everything on the tech side of geocaching and geolocation-based games. That's also the podcast that is responsible for us starting our podcast. That's hosted by Daryl W4 and The Bad Cop. The episode that persuaded us to start a podcast was one they had with Rob Walsh as a guest. So
there you go. Do you guys understand that when you start a podcast, you might inspire others to start a podcast? And that's a good thing. We're all helping each other help each other. That's cool.
I guess they do more than talk about geocaching over there as well.
Right.
The next podcast is nerdchurchpodcast.com. The title says it all.
Nerd Church. Yeah. Now there's a kick butt. You know, we talk about titles. The title of your podcast is like the headline. Nerd Church. I'm right now. If they had one, I would buy a shirt.
All with this one. It's a very funny, well-informed podcast with a multitude of hosts. I think there's 5 or 6 of them on there. And they just do a weekly show of bringing the geek news and the things they've liked over the years as geeks and nerds. Brilliant.
Brilliant.
The next one is Hollywood Babylon with Ralph Garman and Kevin Smith over at smodcast.com. Need to say more about that one. I just love the humour on that one. I've got that Benny Hill childish sense of humour, I guess.
Right. The best
and then
kind.
On the other side of the coin is The Walk over at sqpn.com with Father Roderick. Not being a religious person, I didn't know if I'd like that one or not, but I don't know, there's something that draws me to it, and I can get a lot out of it and understand a lot from it. Is understanding a lot from it the right thing to say? I don't know. Finally is Conquer Stress, Depression and Anxiety podcast over at vigeo.com. That's VIGEOO.com.
Thank you so much for spelling that out. Man, that makes my life a whole lot easier. Thank you so much, Mark.
And oddly enough, that is probably the only podcast I've ever found from New and Noteworthy in iTunes. It's the only one. The rest I've discovered in a multitude of different ways. GeoGearheads is through geocaching, which is what our show's about. Nerd Church was through a post on Twitter. I posted about another podcast having a cool opening intro tune, music, and somebody from the Nerd Church posted about their music and how cool theirs was. So I checked that out and then got into the podcast. Hollywood Babylon, it's Kevin Smith. I just like his stuff. And The Walk, I think that came from listening to Cliff Ravenscraft recently. Anyway, Dave, that's my last 5 in 5. Again, this is Mark from the OBeep Geocaching Podcast at obeep.com. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mark. Always great to hear from you. Mark actually does the show with his son. How cool is that? And, what's great about that? Number one, I cannot get over Nerd Church. I got to go check it out as soon as we're done here. But if, you don't have to podcast with your kid, but maybe it's the holiday season and all. It's just really getting me into family and things like that. But when you look back on those episodes that you do with your children or your family or your wife or whoever, it's going to be cool when they're like, I don't know, adults and they were, 12. I know Dan Class does The Bitterest Pill. And it started off with his son who was, I believe at the time, 4, 6, 8. He was a little kid and be like, my dad and I make an announcement. And he's in high school now. But I've watched his whole family, or I've listened to his whole family grow up. And it's really a cool thing to do. Might be something to think about. But thank you again. If you have a last 5 in 5, go over to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact, and you can actually just use the button right there, or you can record one like Mark did and set it on in. Thanks again, Mark. Again, you can find him at obeep, that's BEEP.com.
In case you missed it, it's time for a podcast rewind.
And speaking of family and being nostalgic, I have put out a new episode. I don't do these very often, of Building a Better Dave. You can find it at betterdave.com. And I'm talking about the other side of Christmas. What's the other side of Christmas? Well, it's stuff like this. Frosty the Snowman. Happy birthday. This guy would slide around without using his feet. Now, I know for the record he didn't have feet, but he slid around and he played a lot with children, which made me think about Michael Jackson. And that's when it came to me. Frosty the Snowman is a pedophile. I'm pretty sure. We need to go back and watch the tape for any inappropriate things. I know there's the one scene where the kids are playing leapfrog. I want to watch that scene in slow-mo. There you go. That actually, there's a whole bunch. It's an episode. It's much more serious than that, but that was me being goofy. Find that at betterdave.com. Also was on the Podcasters Roundtable with Ray Ortega, Daniel J. Lewis, Matthew McQueenie, and Adi Kajora, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And we're talking about beyond iTunes. And here's a little clip from that.
I think the reason why Google have not stepped up their game is because they're being lazy about it, or they simply don't care about the whole podcast movement. I'm just throwing ideas out here. But
how much money does Google make from podcasting?
Nothing.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest reason why.
And I wonder if it's because Apple kind of took the mantle. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that. I'm sure you did it because it was very kind of profound for podcasting. But The Verge had that article about the kind of new stars of podcasting, and they did a nice video piece, which was actually 10 minutes on podcasting, talking to real people, Alex Bloomberg from Startup and ESPN. But they brought up a good point. I think the PRX gentleman, he said that Odeo, and anybody who read Hatching Twitter knows the story, Odeo was the kind of audio podcasting company that was a precursor to Twitter. And why did Odeo go under? Because Apple came out with their podcasting in iTunes. And I often wonder if, while it was great for Apple and we like it, and now Apple is like 2/3 of the entire market of podcasting, did Odeo not making it hurt everything else? Because maybe we need a third-party platform that's above everybody else, like a Netflix, where you can get it on anything. It's kind of platform agnostic. What do you think?
Well, Yahoo back in the day had an actual directory before iTunes, and then iTunes came out and they went, same thing. They went, never mind. And it went away.
You would actually be surprised on one of the apps. and you might not guess this, but I'm looking at the list here. It's a web app, Android, Windows Phone, TV set-top box, automobiles, iOS, BlackBerry, and Windows. Any guesses on what app that is? iHeartRadio.
Of course. But
It's on almost everything. They just don't have a desktop app or a Linux app or a Kindle Fire app.
And you know what's even hurting iHeartRadio a lot more right now is that they're not in the UK. I mean,
there you go. So it was a really interesting discussion about, it was, on one hand, it was beyond iTunes, but yeah, we talked a lot about iTunes and different places like Stitcher and TuneIn and things like that. And you can find that over at podcastersroundtable.com. Always a good time with that.
Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Couple quick things before we get to our interview today, which will have a Because of My Podcast story. I am, next week, of course, is the big My Favorite Podcast Is episode. And, man, it was a while ago. Back when we had John Lee Dumas on the Podcasters Roundtable, I was approached by a company called rev.com. They do transcriptions, and it was amazing because I have used other transcription services before, and it's a law of reciprocity. They asked me, would you like me to transcribe an episode for you? So I had them transcribe the episode where John Lee Dumas was on the Podcasters Roundtable. And to make a long story short, when it came time to have somebody transcribe My Favorite Podcast Is, I had, let's see, as I looked down, I had 31 people submitted things for My Favorite Podcast Is, and I uploaded them to rev.com, and I'm going to tell you in about an hour and a half. Now, granted, these are all like 2-minute segments, but I didn't expect it to be turned around quite that fast. I think on their website, I forget what they say is the typical turnaround time, but it was like done. And now it's just a matter of me copying and pasting it. I went to Fiverr to have a book cover designed, and I'm very happy with that. They're doing some twitches for that and some changes, but overall, I'm pretty happy with that. So next week, you'll be hearing, it's really interesting to hear one of the favorite podcasts, the person who submitted it hasn't even listened to it. That's an interesting one. We have a couple from people who don't have podcasts. So if you want to kind of get into the brain of why people listen to podcasts, tune in next week for the second annual My Favorite Podcast Is episode. And we'll kind of break format next week. There won't be any last 5 and 5s or things of that nature, because as you might imagine, 31 times 2 minutes plus me throwing in my nonsense along the way, it's going to be a rather long show, as was last week's show. And you'll have access to all those transcripts as well. The other thing I just wanted to quickly throw in here, a friend of the show, Michael Butler, over at rockandrollgeek.com. The guy's been podcasting since 2004. Yeah, he's the very first music podcaster. And again, rockandrollgeek.com just put out episode number 600. And I wanted to tip my hat to the man that wrote the original book on podcasting, Todd Cochran, over at geeknewscentral.com. Just put out episode number 1000. Yeah, that's what happens when you've been doing it for 10 years. Holy cow. That's amazing. So congratulations to Todd on that. Also, can't say, I'm going to tease you. You ready? No, that's not really. Wait till you guys hear who some of the keynotes are for New Media Expo next year. And of course, I'm the director of podcasting at New Media Expo. Some really cool names are coming down the pike, and I can't wait till they announce them so I can quit bursting at the seams. If you're unfamiliar with New Media Expo, it's a great place to go. Check it out. schoolofpodcasting.com/NMX will get you right there. And next up, I was very lucky to, I think Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast told me about a particular post. and it's by John Wilkerson. And it's kind of weird how things work. We'd actually set up the interview, and then we had some things come up where he couldn't make it. Then he called in on Ask the Podcast Coach. Well, you can find that again over at askthepodcastcoach.com. If you want to, if you have any questions, just call in live Saturday mornings, 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. And John called in, kind of got our feet wet with each other, and then we rescheduled. And this is a really cool interview. So without further ado, here's my interview with John. And if you have children or you're trying to find time to podcast, some really cool tips and tricks on how to produce a podcast, and especially with children. So take it away, Mr. Wilkerson. All right. Well, joining me, here's a guy. When did you say you started podcasting? November of 2005?
Yes.
Awesome. So this guy has he has a lot of experience under his belt. He's from thewiredhomeschool.com. And I actually heard about him from a post that he did called 5 Tips for Podcasting When You Have Little Kids. And I think that's going to apply for just people in the house. I know that you had said at one point you had 10 people in the house, but I have had people in the house, but not a nest like that. So John Wilkerson, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dave.
And we were kind of joking before I hit record. As I record this, I just got back from a Christmas concert for my stepson. So that was a surprise. It's nothing more fun than coming home from work going, hey, surprise, what? You're going to a concert tonight. So all the time I had planned for researching John went out the window. So I hate to do this move. So please I apologize in advance. But if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is John Wilkerson. And like you said, I've been podcasting since November 2005. I started with a podcast called Jesus Geek, which was kind of a general kind of geek topics as it related to my faith. And from there, I did a number of different projects, some that involved online giving through charities. I did some charity podcasts and even a television and film podcast for a while, and finally landed on the podcast that I'm doing right now, which I'm going into my 3rd or 4th year. I can't even remember right now. The Wired Homeschool, where I basically cover technology topics as they relate to homeschooling.
Well, since you've got a few under your belt that you no longer do, let's hit that question. How do you know when it's time to go, hang up, let's hang up the bell? What inspired you to go, well, the Jesus Geek, you've had a good run, but, what came across you that you said, yeah, I'm done with this one?
I think the biggest thing was when I started coming to the night that I would normally record my podcast and go, I got to do this again. And that was a good indication. I mean, because there's always geek topics to talk about, so it's not like you're ever going to run out of information. But it was one of those things where I was just like, I've had a good run. I'd done over 500 episodes, and I said, that's enough. And I had experimented with a lot of different formats. I had done, for a while, I did it as a daily podcast, and then I did it as bi-weekly. So I tried to mix it up and do something different, and kind of like the thrill was gone with the podcast, so to speak. And so it was just time to kind of hang my hat up and say, that's the end of that. And I was actually doing, towards the end of Jesus Geek, I was actually doing, I think, 3 or 4 podcasts simultaneously. I can't remember off the top of my head. And
that's a rough gig.
It is a rough gig. It is a rough gig. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I was feeling overwhelmed by doing that many, because I don't do long podcasts typically. And so I was only doing anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes a podcast. So,
and I'm going to jump in here. This is a key point. If you're finding that you don't have time to podcast, I don't have time, one of the first things you might want to ask yourself is, instead of doing an hour-long show, maybe it should be 10 minutes. Maybe it should be one topic, not 4. And so notice John here is doing short podcasts. Good move.
It wasn't a ton of commitment on my part, but it was just to the point where I really felt like I was kind of done and wanted to stay and focus on the Wired Homeschool, which has, because of my podcast.
All right.
I have a story for you because I know you're probably going to ask me that.
Yeah.
I actually got to speak at 2 homeschooling conventions because of my podcast. So
I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. Living proof here. Having a podcast puts you in a arena, I guess you could say, put you in a position where you were seen as an expert. And in John's case, he's kind of an expert at homeschooling and having children and being a dad.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I got to talk about technology and homeschooling. And I'm kind of happy with this podcast now. It's really kind of meeting all the needs. I get to talk about geeky topics and homeschooling, so two things I'm passionate about.
Well, does some of this have to do with, are your kids now getting older and are they homeschooled? Is it something where it just became part of your life and you went, hey, I think I'll talk about this now?
Oh yeah. We've been homeschooling for a long time. Since day one. And so it's always been something that I've been interested in and passionate about. And then tying technology to it is just even better. In fact, I'm going to be getting some programmable robots here to test out in a few weeks, which I'm excited about getting and reviewing and checking it out with my kids.
And what are you going to program them to do? Like the dishes or?
Oh, I wish. No, they're only about the size of like the Lego Mindstorms. They're not Mindstorms. I wish they were. That would be pretty cool. But those are a little bit more expensive than these. But they're designed to teach kids programming, how to code. Wow. And so you sync them with your iPad and they go and do whatever you tell them to do. But probably not do the dishes. That
would be awesome, though.
It would be.
Some of you down, Well, how many kids do you have?
I have 7.
7 kids, and their ages are? Hold on, before we get to the ages, can we just think about that a second? You have 7 children. One more time. 7, not 5, not 6, not 8, 7. Holy moly.
Their ages are, my oldest will be 20 in a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old and a 10-year-old and a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Okay, so that means when you started 5 years ago, I had 5 kids 10 and under in my house. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Okay, so let's talk about that. How do you podcast when you got a bunch of kids in the house?
Well, the main thing was really I ended up burning the midnight oil a lot to begin with. And even, like I said, I started in 2005. Believe it or not, I actually recorded episodes of my podcast on my BlackBerry, sitting in my car on my lunch break at times.
I've done that. Not on a BlackBerry.
But. Yeah. So, I came up with all kinds of little tricks, but I think a lot like with everything, you have to do a lot of prep work. Mm-hmm. And so I could do it in 20 to 30 minute spurts and during the week. And so I would plan it, and I had a specific day and time when I was going to record and, let my wife know about it and made sure the dishes were done and the trash was taken out. And, my wife was all set
right
for the evening. And then I could kind of go downstairs in my little hidey hole and record podcasts.
I'm going to say that was going to be one of my tips when people ask me about this subject, I'm like, if you can come up with a day, and time. It's always Tuesday at such and such time. Dad's going to go away for a bit, and don't bug him basically, and things like that. So that's a great tip.
Yeah, and I did mine after they were in bed. So that made it easier for them because they didn't have to worry about disrupting my schedule or anything like that. So, and fortunately, our kids slept
Soundly,
even when they were, they slept soundly. But I was in the basement and they were all the way upstairs. So there was 2 floors between us.
Yeah, no, that's right. Welcome to the Jesus Geek.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. What other tips have you figured out along the way?
Well, like I mentioned, leaving the house. If you can use your home off, if you can use your office or go outside and record. I've recorded a lot of podcasts at the park. It's really cool. Gives a nice little, ambiance, little background noise and things going on. Like we said, recording in the car. Mm-hmm. I had a buddy of mine who started a podcast, and I think like the first 10 episodes he recorded all in his car because his house was so noisy, and because he had 5 kids, also under 10 years old. Yep. And he would sit out in his car, in his driveway where he had a Wi-Fi signal and Skype people and and record a podcast. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. When we talk about recording in the car, we are talking about it being parked.
Yes. Absolutely.
Although I know a couple of people that keep trying to record podcasts while they're driving, and I'm like, that's really not a good idea.
No. Even if you're a trucker, it's not a good idea. Yeah. Recording early in the morning or late at night work too. Sometimes you can't be, shall we say, enthusiastic when you record. Yeah. But you can still record. But that usually also means you have to have number one, like I said, doing a lot of prep work. You have to have all that done. And usually what I did when I would do it is I would just record the episode. And so if I recorded a 30-minute episode, I'd slot my 30-minute time slot there for recording. And that's all I would do. I wouldn't worry about posting it online or anything like that. Just get the recording done and then post it up later on. And so usually my recording day was 2 days before I actually released the podcast. And so that would give me a little buffer there to actually get it posted. So I wasn't up till 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever, recording an episode. And a bonus tip here, whenever I got free time, let's say if my wife was out on with the kids or whatever, I would sometimes do marathon podcasts and just record as many episodes as I could back to back. If I knew what my next 3 or 4 topics were going to be, I'd go ahead and record them and get them out of the way. And if I had to add anything later on that was time sensitive, I would just either tack it on at the beginning or tack it on at the end.
That's a great tip. And that's it. Again, it goes back to that prep where you are thinking not about this episode, but also this episode and the next one after that and the next one after that. And that way, when you do get that magical time of, hey, I'm taking the kids to the mall, you're like, really? You can say, all right, pedal to the metal and let's just pound these out. So
exactly. Ding, ding, ding. Go for it.
Awesome.
Another thing that I also recommend is actually give yourself a time limit. Like I said, my podcast generally, even still today, only lasts between about 20 and 30 minutes max, unless I'm doing an interview. Usually if I'm doing an interview, those will go about an hour, but those don't really generally they don't require as much prep time because you're asking someone else to provide most of the content. Mm-hmm. And, unless you're someone who does a lot of interviews, and you're doing them constantly and you have to do a lot of research on the person you're interviewing. But I think time limits are important. And I think a lot of people sometimes they sit down and you've mentioned it before. They just kind of go rambling on and the podcast is as long as the podcast is. Whereas if they said, I'm only going to have a 30-minute podcast, it teaches them and they train themselves to be more concise and to say what needs to be said and get in and get out. And in a way, some people will say, well, that's too much like radio and we shouldn't be doing things like radio. But you know what? The people who do radio, they get in, they get what they need done. They're out and they're done in their 30 minutes. And they have said what they needed to say in 30 minutes instead of chasing squirrels and bright, shiny things all through their podcast,
Yeah, I've had situations where I'll have a presentation and it's, set to be 40 minutes or something like that. Somebody go, oh, this is great. We'd love to have you come speak. Can you do it in 30 or 20 or whatever it is? And you're like, yeah, sure. And it does. It's actually harder to do a shorter time period because you have to really figure out, okay, what is the main point of this presentation? And okay, let's find that main point now. Let's dust off the most important facts or figures or stories or whatever that reinforce that point. And you really have to figure out, okay, what is going to get cut? And in the end, you end up with, like the top 20. It's here are the greatest hits of this presentation, boiled down to, now 20 minutes when it used to be 40. And so I'm going to interrupt myself there and say that, yes, a shorter show might take up less time, but it actually might be a little harder than that because you have to really figure out what is it that I'm trying to say, which in the end is probably a good thing. I know one of your other tips was to include your kids.
Yes.
So explain that a little bit.
Well, when I say include your kids, I don't necessarily mean actually podcast with them.
Okay.
Although some people may want to do that. But usually what I mean by that is maybe challenge your kids. If you have to record during the day, and I've had to do sometimes interviews on a weekend or whatever, or during the day when on a day off, I would challenge my kids to be quiet for 30 minutes while I did the interview. Maybe send them outside or whatever, and then give them a small reward if they're successful at staying quiet for that 30 minutes, and then explain to them, hey, you're helping me podcast by being quiet. And so that kind of gives them a little bit of ownership in doing it. And they, that hasn't been as successful, but it happens usually when you're interviewing someone to say, listen, I'm here with my kids. I got like 20 minutes to do this. I just want to let you know, you might hear my kids running around in the background.
Right.
And it's why I do, anytime someone asks me to be interviewed or I do an interview, it's usually 9:00 or later.
Yeah.
Is because they're typically all in bed by then. And if they're not, it's the older ones that are up and they're able to be quiet.
Yeah. Well, and for me, at least, when I hear somebody, I know I listen to, there's a podcast called She Podcast. It's Elsie and Jessica. And Jessica just had a baby. I mean, she just had a kid.
Oh,
and
boy.
So she's trying to do a podcast with a newborn, and she's literally like holding the baby as she's talking to the microphone. And she kept apologizing. And I sent her an email. I'm like, don't apologize. I said, those are like the coolest. To me, I mean, a baby is a miracle. So when, I hear that little itty bitty squeak of a voice come through the microphone and, she's rocking it or whatever. And I'm like, no. It's like, I know you just had a kid. I really appreciate the fact that you're still doing the podcast because kids can be one of the number one reasons why people podfade. And,
right.
To me, I'm like, hey, it's just, it's keeping it real, and it doesn't take away from the content. It's not distracting, and so I'm like, just run with it. So, and I would think it would be the same thing if all of a sudden I heard a bunch of screaming in your back end, we'd just say, hey, by the way, John has a house full, and I don't think it's the end of the world. I can see where some people, you always want it to be as professional as you can, but on the other hand, I think one of the things that makes podcasting slightly different from professional radio is that you do have things like that. It keeps it real, as people say.
Right.
And, I love that. So, well, what other lessons have you learned if we kind of steer away from the kids? As somebody who's been doing this now, I mean, you're let's see, November 2005. So you've done this. You've got next year will be 10 years.
Yeah, I got 9 years in. It's funny because I have been looking back over some of my old blog posts, and I'm actually kind of putting them all together, and I'm grouping them under this thing that I'm calling "Don't Forget to Press Record," which is kind of my podcasting tips. And
great title, man.
And I'm actually working on a new post called "Break the Rules." Because we have all, and this is no offense to anyone who teaches podcasting. I know you teach podcasting, and there's all these rules that you're supposed to follow, so to speak, when you podcast, even though it's like we started out being rebellious and saying, we do it any way we want to. And now it's like, oh, you have to do it this way.
Yeah.
So
now hang tight here, because you're going to hear some stuff that I'm like, really? So some interesting stats, especially about hosting on your own website. Not something I recommend, but little insight here.
So I say, I'm working on some of the rules to break. For example, I went 6.5 years before actually purchasing any hosting for my media files. I had them all hosted on my website and never had any trouble with them being downloaded or speed or anything like that. And one of my podcasts at the time, I was seeing about 1,500 downloads a week per episode. So, and I was using the Blueberry stats. So, I wasn't looking at the server stats. So I was looking at the Blueberry stats for that, and I was using their free stats. But I just had it up on my hosting provider. And while most of the time you're not going to recommend that to anyone, I got away with it for years, and I could probably still get away with it today, just because I'm not getting tons and tons of downloads on my podcast, and I'm fine with that. I understand that that's my audience, that's the size of my audience, and I'm cool with that. So there are I always want to tell people is don't feel like you have to podcast the way everyone else does, because just because there are people out there who are doing it professionally, yes, if you want to do this as part of your business, there are probably some rules you want to follow. But if you're a hobby podcaster like I am, then you don't need to follow all these rules. You can record directly to your computer if you want to, and all these other things. If you don't want to have a website and you just want to use Libsyn, use Libsyn. Do whatever you want. Don't, especially if it's a hobby. And I think that when you look out there, most people out there are hobby podcasters, and I feel like we've gotten into this situation where everyone is starting to sound the same, because everyone's buying the same equipment and they're recording everything the same way. And, like I said, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to sound like radio, but wait a minute, we do want to sound like radio if we're trying to do this as a business.
Right.
So there's all these rules that I think people just need to go back and start breaking all the rules again and do it the way they want to do it.
I think you've got a great point. I always say, people will see somebody who's doing really successful and they will try to mimic their show, and to the point of almost ripping it off. And I'm always like, if it was that easy, there were a ton of people that put on suits and let their hair grow long and they didn't become the Beatles. So you've got to have talent. You've got to have a smidge of luck, I think, is also in there, and a lot of determination and a lot of passion. And I wrote a post for Podertainment magazine, and I said, who's the next Jimi Hendrix of podcasting? Because I watched a documentary on Hendrix, and he just was crazy in terms of like, oh, let's play this backwards, and I'm going to turn this, and just things where people are like, what? You can't do that.
Right.
But he was almost like a mad scientist of experimenting with music. So yeah, and I want to piggyback on something. I had a comment, and I'm glad you said this because I can throw in it's a really good comment. It's from Corey Finneran, who does Mommy's Cocktail Hour. And he says, I'm not an evangelist for self-hosting. He says, but in total, our podcast has been downloaded over 1 million times. He says that one of our podcasts was getting 30,000 to 40,000 downloads an episode. The highest episode was 58,000. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when we're skirting through with 50 or 75 downloads, we've never been contacted about our traffic and our usage. So I wish I knew what the magic algorithm is, because I know I've had some people that have had much less than that have been told, hey, knock it off. And then obviously with you, and in this case, Corey, there are obviously people that, I'll have to ask him who his host was. Who was your host in this case?
DreamHost. I've been using DreamHost for years. And I had, like I said, I had one podcast, just each episode was getting about 1,500 downloads a week. And now it was shared hosting. And so sometimes I would run into issues with, the shared hosting provider not working the way I wanted it to work, and my blog wouldn't come up.
Right.
But for some reason, the file's always downloaded. I never had anyone say, hey, I couldn't download the file. And, but it's been it's been a wild ride. I mean, I started out using Podomatic in 2005.
Oh boy.
My first 5 or 6 episodes were posted there. And then I moved to a service called GM Podcasting, which wasn't around for very long.
Okay. I was going to say, I've never heard of that one.
No, it was pretty, it was pretty niche. It was for Christian podcasters.
Okay.
And so they were, they were kind of particular about who they were allowing on their network, which was understandable. And it kind of went away. And then that's when I went to my own hosting. And unfortunately, I lost a number of blog posts,
right.
Along those lines. But hey, archive.org, if your site ever crashes, I actually rebuilt an entire website using archive.org. So
wow.
Yeah.
There you go. See, it's so weird because I had Ralph, he does the SDR show, and he was on DreamHost and he was asked to move. So it's weird how that, it makes you wonder like what's, but that's really interesting. Well, you said you do, some recording. Let's talk a little bit about your gear.
Sure.
What have you used? What have you retired, in the past? Anything like that?
I used the crappy old headsets, I used those for a long time. I used a blue snowflake, which is the little brother to the snowball.
Mm-hmm.
I used that. And then I kind of I have a Zoom H2, and for a while I actually just recorded straight into my Zoom H2 and then just took that off and edited it down.
So what this shows you here is he goes through the history of his gear. You don't have to start off with thousands of dollars worth of equipment or even hundreds of dollars. You can always change it later. Granted, we don't want to waste our money, but you can always change stuff later.
And now I'm using, the one just about everyone recommends, the ATR 2100. I got it when it was $30.
Awesome.
And jumped on that deal real quick.
That sounds great.
And I've been using that. And I've never really used a mixer. I've always recorded directly into my computer, but lately I'm using Boss Jock on my iPad, and I just record directly into that and then edit. I usually take the file out and edit it because it doesn't really get the audio level high enough that I've noticed. That's the same as when I record in Audacity or whatever. So,
and also in case you're wondering, I'm using Boss Jock to hit pause and play and pause and play and pause and play as we listen to this interview together.
I usually pull that out and do a few edits and things like that in Audacity, and then I'm done. It's not really, doesn't really even take that long.
Well, I was going to ask you, are you a post-production guy then, where you go out, you record in your car? Do you then just bring it into Audacity and mix in the music or anything like that, or?
I don't anymore. I mean, since I've gotten Boss Jock, it's been, it has saved me so much time.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have the carts in there, and I put my music right in. And then about the only thing I do when I edit now is I do some compression on it, and possibly if there's any mistakes in there that I need to edit out, I do that. And all my interviews are done. If I do an interview, it's just Skype with Pamela Skype recorder, and works great. So I've been using Pamela for about 5 or 6 years now. So, and haven't lost a single episode. So
that's great.
Single interview. So
I gotta say, I just started using that, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
and I'm going to pop in here as well. Pamela is okay. I don't like it as much as Power Gramo. Power Gramo, though, I do not recommend anymore because they've just abandoned. Like, you can buy their software, but you need a registration number, and then they don't answer their email to get a registration number. So I no longer recommend Power Gramo. The interesting thing about Pamela is it doesn't work with the latest version of Skype. Now, the cool thing is Pamela has a link, so you can download Skype 6.2 or whatever it is. But if you've upgraded to Skype and all of a sudden it's not recording anything like I did, that's why. It doesn't work anymore. And Pamela's answer is go bug Microsoft. So just a little update on Pamela. If you're using it, don't upgrade to the latest version of Skype.
It's been like I said, I have been the person, I break the rules. I record directly in my computer. I don't use an external recorder or mixer or anything like that. And it's because I really like to keep it, I just like to keep it as simple as possible.
That's it.
And when you start introducing all this stuff, and I feel like there are people who want to start podcasting and they see people with mixers and I got to do this and mix minus that and blah, blah, blah. And they say, okay, I can never do that. And I say, listen, have you got an iPad? You can record a podcast.
Yeah.
It's really not that hard.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome. Well, have you done anything you may, and if you say no, I don't even know if you're interested in this. Have you done anything with any kind of advertising or monetization, or is this just, I know you said this is just a hobby thing, but have you?
I have done monetization for a while. I was doing some things through Blueberry and Tech Podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I sold ads directly to people in my website. And mostly what I'm doing right now is just affiliate sales of services that I think that my audience would like. And I'm starting to look into Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe starting next year, I'm going to have a Patreon page so that people can support me. And I'm actually also, I've been talking with someone about getting underwriters, kind of like what they do for public television and public radio, and saying, listen, if you're an underwriter, if you give this much, then I will, and this would be for businesses only, obviously, but I will mention you at the end of every podcast, and there'll be a special page on my website for you for anyone who's an underwriter where you get a link and all that. So I'm exploring some different things, and I make enough money to pay the bills, which is for a person who has a hobby is great because I can pay for my hosting, I can pay for any gear that I want, and I don't have to really worry. It's a hobby that's been paying for itself, which is pretty cool.
Right. Which for anybody that plays golf, that is not the case typically.
Right.
Well, you said you sold advertising directly. How did you go about doing that? How did you find sponsors? Wait till you hear the answer on this one.
Actually, all I did was I had a page on my website, and I mentioned it in the podcast, and really that was it. I think maybe I tweeted out the page a couple 2-3 times, and that was it. I never really went to anyone and pursued them. I let them come to me.
There you go.
And it was really pretty cool when people started saying, "Yeah, I'll pay to be mentioned in your podcast."
Now, was there a minimum, like they had to buy a month, or
they had to buy 3 months?
Okay.
Yeah. And so, 3 months, and it was, I mean, I wasn't charging a ton,
right?
Really compared to what some people are getting.
Right. Well, and the beauty of that is, to have somebody advertise on your show once, you need that repeat, to really get their brand stuck in your listener's head. They need to hear it more than once. They need to hear it more than, 4 times probably. I think you have to hear no 7 times before you get to a yes sometimes in sales or something like that. So, by really just getting it back in and having that repeat, that's, I think, where you start to get some return on the investment from an advertising standpoint. But very interesting stuff. Well, John, thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave.
There you go. Super nice guy. A lot of things learned there. Again, that's why when I realized he'd been podcasting that long, I'm like, oh, let's talk about some gear. Let's talk about monetization, anything else. So, John, thank you so much for that. And I think I'll wrap up the show here with a little history lesson talking about the power of podcasting. This was probably back, 2006. I would love to know when this was, but the podcasting was going great guns and musicians loved it because there were a lot of people doing Podsafe music podcasts, and there were websites like Music Alley that allowed you to play anything on that particular site. You didn't have to even contact the musician. And there's a musician named Slau, S-L-A-U, good friend of mine, and runs a studio in New York. And he had written a song. And to make a long story short, the Podsafe people like Brother Love and Angie B and all these other musicians who at the time were kind of famous in our own little bubble got together and recorded a song. Let me play just a little clip of this here. All right, think We Are the World here. Ready for this? My favorite is there was a guy named Brother Love. And Brother Love is like, he was kind of like, before John Lee Dumas was the Energizer Bunny of podcasting, there was Brother Love, who was just Brother Love, baby. You know what I'm talking about. I'll find a clip of Brother Love.
It is the Musician's Cooler. This is Brother Love. Musician's Cooler was one of the first podcasts to play my music, thanks to Dave Jackson. Rockin', 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 yeah. Oh, yeah. I want to tell you something. I want to tell you something. Musicians Cooler, something. Play you something new, oh, yeah. Brother Love, yeah. Down for something. Brother Love, yeah. On your show. Thank you, Dave Jackson, Mission Cooler, yeah. And if you want to check out more Brother Love, go to brotherloverocks.com where you can grab my album off of the old CD Baby in iTunes. Thank you so much, Dave. Love you.
That's how you do an ID, my man.
You're awesome. Oh, yeah. Thanks, man. I got to go burn a CD.
He's a great guy. And, boy, you want to talk about how to self-promote yourself. This guy was all about self-promotion. Everybody knew Brother Love, but he's the guy that's screaming in this lovely Christmas song. Here's a little bit of this. Warm, funny, just warm and fuzzy, I guess is what I'm looking for. Christmas music. Like somebody going, so anyway. So the good news is, that was way back in the day. I need to find out when that was. Yeah, I brought 32 singers from 9 different countries. Because they would basically, Slough would send them the music, they would record just themselves singing it, and they put it together. The website says 2005, and I'll put a link out in the show notes again to schoolofpodcasting.com/440 as Slough does a podcast called Sessions with Slough. We'll fast forward it to 10 years later, and Slough has put this out as a solo artist. I love Slough, great guy, super. Can we take a little 2-minute tangent? One of the funniest lines ever. It turns out that Slough is sight impaired. And it's like 2006. I'm being Slough's elbow, and I'm helping him around the New Media Expo. And we were trying to find a room, and we couldn't find it. And yeah. Slough goes, man, talk about the blind leading the blind. That was a great line. And he's put this out as a solo artist. Again, go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/440, and you can download this song from iTunes along with Podsafe for Peace. We actually raised a lot of money for UNICEF, and now Slough is bringing it back as a solo artist. And I hope you have a great holiday season, whatever sort of holiday you are celebrating. Spend some time with your family. Stay warm. If you're on the East Coast, stay cool if you're on the West Coast. And next week, don't forget, we have the My Favorite Podcast Is episode. And then it's on to 2015. How cool is that? So here we go with Slough. Oh, before I hit play on this, somebody asked me, speaking of Christmas, where did I get I had that little jingle about wishing you a Merry Christmas. I got that from Music Radio Creative. If you go over to schoolofpodcasting.com/MRC for Music Radio Creative, that's where I got the jingle. They have a bunch of them made for the holidays that you can pick up in a package. So, and I bought that last year, and I will be using it every year. That's the nice thing about that kind of stuff. You buy it once and you can use it, and the value of it continues to increase every year. So check them out, schoolofpodcasting.com/MRC. And yes, that is an affiliate link, but they do awesome work. Now, here is Slough with What If Every Day Were Christmas. Take care. God bless.
First winter snow outside my window feels like that time again to me. From mistletoe, a Christmas show, and the lighting of that famous Christmas tree. People are thinking of their loved ones as signs of holidays appear, but it all goes by in the blink of an eye, and then we have to wait another year. But what if every day were Christmas? What a wonderful world this would be. We would never feel blue. We'd make all our dreams come true if Christmas were every day. This time brings out the good in people. A kindly gesture plants the seed. Everybody's nice. There is no price when we lend a hand to those in need. What if every day were Christmas? What a wonderful world this would be. We would never feel blue. We'd make all our dreams come true if Christmas were every day. So throughout the year, from the summer to the spring, I'll take Yuletide cheer. Until then, it's Christmas again. What if every day were Christmas? What a wonderful world this would be. We would never feel blue. We'd make all our dreams come true if Christmas were every day. We would never feel blue. We'd make all our dreams come true if Christmas were every